I woke up already remembering things that never happened. That was the first sign something was wrong. Not the hospital room, not the IV needle taped into the back of my hand, not the slow rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside my bed, not even the dull headache that pulsed behind my eyes every time I tried to move. The first sign was the certainty. When I opened my eyes, memories were already there waiting for me, as if my life had simply been paused and now resumed. I remembered the last 2 days clearly. Not perfectly, but clearly enough to feel normal. I remembered waking up during the night. I remembered a nurse bringing me water. I remembered someone visiting me. These memories sat naturally in my mind, like ordinary experiences that had happened while I was recovering. Except none of it had actually happened. At least, that's what they told me. The nurse was standing beside my bed adjusting the monitor when I asked the question casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I asked her if my sister had already left. She paused in the middle of pressing a button and slowly turned toward me. Her expression didn't look confused. It looked certain. She told me I hadn't had any visitors at all. The answer didn't make sense to me, not because she seemed unsure, but because I was sure too. I told her my sister had come the night before, around midnight. I pointed to the chair beside the window and explained that she had been sitting there for quite a while. The memory was vivid. I could see it clearly in my mind. My sister leaning forward in that chair, elbows resting on her knees, speaking quietly so she wouldn't disturb anyone else in the hallway. I could remember the worried smile on her face when she told me everything was going to be fine, and that I just needed to rest. I could even remember the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the room. The nurse glanced at the chair and then looked back at me. She told me that the chair hadn't been moved since the morning before. Something about the calm certainty in her voice made the room feel strangely colder. I looked back at the chair again, trying to reconcile what she was saying with the memory in my head. It looked exactly as I remembered it, yet the cushion didn't look pressed down like someone had been sitting there. The strange thing wasn't that she disagreed with me. The strange thing was how real the memory felt. Normally, when you wake up from a dream, the details begin to fade almost immediately. They soften and blur the moment you try to hold on to them. This memory didn't behave like that. It had weight and texture. I could remember the flickering hallway lights coming through the doorway and the faint sounds of footsteps outside. Everything about it felt like something that had actually happened. So I did the most logical thing possible in that moment. I assumed the nurse was mistaken. Later that afternoon, a doctor came in to check on me. He introduced himself, asked a few routine questions, and examined the bandage wrapped around my head. His voice had that calm, practiced tone doctors often have, the kind that makes even serious conversations sound ordinary. After a few minutes, he asked a question that felt oddly specific. He asked if I could remember what I had done the previous afternoon. The answer came easily to me. I told him that I had watched television for a while and that there had been a cooking show on. I explained that 2 chefs had been arguing about garlic and that one of them had dropped a frying pan on the floor. The doctor nodded slowly and asked me what the kitchen in the show looked like. I described the bright lights, the steel counters, and the red apron one of the chefs was wearing. He listened without interrupting and then quietly wrote something down on his clipboard. After a moment, he looked back at me and said that the previous afternoon I had still been unconscious. According to him, I had only regained consciousness that morning. The statement didn't make sense to me at all. I told him that I clearly remembered watching the show. The doctor turned his head toward the television across the room and pointed at it. He explained that the television had been unplugged since the day I had arrived at the hospital. I followed his finger and looked at the screen. It was dark and silent. Behind the stand, the power cord hung loose, clearly disconnected from the wall. That was the moment when the first genuine sense of unease began creeping into my mind. That night, I found it impossible to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, more memories began surfacing. They were small, ordinary moments that felt completely normal. I remembered a nurse bringing me soup. I remembered hearing someone push a metal cart down the hallway late at night. I even remembered having a brief phone conversation with my friend Arjun. Each of these memories felt perfectly believable. But now every single one came with the same disturbing question attached to it. Did that actually happen, or had my mind simply created it? The unsettling part was that none of these memories felt fake. They didn't feel like imagination or dreams. They felt like everyday life. The next morning the doctor returned, but this time he brought someone else with him. She was a woman with glasses and a calm, analytical expression. He introduced her as a neuropsychologist named Dr. Mira. She pulled a chair beside my bed, opened a small notebook, and explained that they wanted to run a few simple tests. The questions began with basic orientation. She asked what year it was, where I was, and what city we were in. I answered every question without difficulty. Then she asked something very simple. She asked what I had eaten for breakfast that morning. Without hesitation, I told her that I had eaten eggs and toast. Before she could respond, the nurse standing near the door gently interrupted. She said that I hadn't eaten anything that morning because I had refused breakfast. I turned toward her in confusion, because I could clearly remember the breakfast tray in front of me. I remembered cutting into the egg and the slightly burnt taste of the toast, but now everyone in the room was looking at me as if I had just described something impossible. Dr. Mira wrote something in her notebook and then calmly said a word I had never heard before. The word was confabulation. She explained that during the accident, a small part of my brain had been affected. The damage wasn't severe enough to erase my memories completely, but it had interfered with something important. Normally, when we remember something, another part of the brain quietly verifies whether that memory actually makes sense. In my case, that verification process was no longer working properly. Whenever my brain encountered a gap in memory, it filled the gap on its own. But instead of filling it with obvious fantasy, it created memories that felt completely real. My mind was fabricating experiences that seemed just as believable as genuine memories. The most disturbing part was that I had no way of recognizing which memories were real and which ones had been invented. At first, it didn't seem like a serious problem. People forget things all the time. But over the next few days, the cracks began appearing everywhere in my daily life. I found myself thanking nurses for conversations they had never had with me. I remembered watching movies that had never been played on the hospital television. At one point, I even thanked a janitor for fixing the air conditioner, only for him to look at me in confusion and say that the air conditioner wasn't broken. Every day, more of my memories turned out to be incorrect, yet they felt identical to real ones. There was no distortion, no fuzziness, no obvious sign that they were false. There was only certainty. 3 nights later, something happened that disturbed me more than anything else before. I remembered a conversation with the doctor. In that memory, it was late at night and the room was dim, except for the faint glow of the machines. I was awake, staring at the ceiling, when the door slowly opened and the doctor walked in quietly. He didn't turn on the lights. Instead, he pulled the chair closer to my bed and sat down. His voice was quiet when he spoke, as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. He told me there was something he hadn't told me earlier. According to him, I hadn't been found after a normal accident. I'd been discovered inside an abandoned building. In the memory, I remember feeling confused because I had no recollection of going there. The doctor leaned closer and told me that when the police had arrived, I had repeatedly insisted that someone else was inside the building with me. When I asked whether the police had found anyone, he hesitated briefly before saying no. The next morning, I asked him about that conversation. I expected him to continue explaining what had happened. Instead, he looked confused. He told me he had never come to my room the night before. He said he had left the hospital at 7 in the evening and had not returned until the morning. I insisted that we had spoken. I described exactly where he had been sitting and what he had told me about the abandoned building. The doctor slowly shook his head and said that what I was describing was likely another confabulation, another memory my brain had created. But something about that memory felt different. It didn't feel like imagination. It felt like a secret that someone had tried to hide. That night I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling as the machines hummed softly around me. A terrifying thought began forming in my mind. If my brain could create entire memories, entire conversations, entire days of experiences, then how could I trust anything I remembered? Even the memories from before the accident suddenly felt uncertain. My childhood, my friends, my past. What if those were just stories my brain had been telling itself all along? The answer to that fear arrived the following afternoon when a police officer came to speak with me. He asked a few routine questions about the accident and what I could remember about the night it happened. I told him honestly that I remembered nothing about being in an abandoned building. He studied my face carefully before saying something that made my chest tighten. He told me that when they had found me, I had been repeating the same sentence over and over again. I asked him what the sentence was. He opened a small notebook and read the words slowly. He said that I had kept saying, "I didn't push him." The room went completely silent after that. I asked him who I was talking about, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked whether I remembered being with anyone that night. I told him that I didn't remember anyone at all. He closed the notebook and told me something that made my skin crawl. According to the security camera outside the building, I had not entered alone. Someone had gone inside with me, and ever since hearing that, fragments of memory have begun appearing in my mind. They come in brief flashes: a dusty staircase, footsteps echoing through an empty hallway, a voice behind me in the darkness, someone standing dangerously close to the edge of a broken balcony. But I have no way of knowing whether those memories are real or whether my brain is inventing them to fill the gaps. Because that is what confabulation does. It fills the spaces where memory is missing. And right now, my memory of that night is nothing but empty space. Somewhere inside my mind, the story of what happened in that abandoned building is slowly being written, piece by piece, memory by memory, truth mixed with invention. One day soon, the final memory will arrive, the one that explains everything. And I'm terrified that when that memory finally appears, it won't be something my brain invented. It will be the one memory that is completely real. The moment I finally remember whether or not I actually pushed him. If this felt real, that's because it was almost real. I'll see you in the next memory.